comment and then a question. The first comment is I'm really glad whenever I hear the word partnerships, having a background working for international NGOs, that there's a lot of knowledge that they have of working on the ground, and particularly when you're talking about scale, I think that there's a lot of resources there. That's great to hear that that's not being forgotten. But my question is about trends and fads, and particularly in development, tends to be a very trendy thing, and there's things that are constantly moving. And how do we prevent the momentum that's been developing on social enterprise from just becoming a fad and moving on to the next and having a long-term effect?
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. We're in sort of almost overload of hype about this, and it's really a question of can the market deliver. And I think there's been it's a bit of a kind of pendulum. We've had a lot of focus on how do we get investors engaged, and how do we set up funds, how do we make money available. And we've actually, certainly here in the UK and in other countries, there has been real progress on that. But much money is sitting undispersed because of the problems that have been highlighted, that there just aren't the organisations that are really ready yet to take on the investment and repay that capital, and it's completely irresponsible for lenders to provide that and see them go under. But and all sorts of work, obviously a lot of the work that the panel are doing, with Shoka particularly, and the role of incubators, both international and in the UK, is really helping. We've also got a lot of programmes running here, which I hope we'll be able to take some learning from, around investment readiness, and what actually the perceptions of when an organisation thinks it's ready for investment and when an investor thinks it's ready are, we could be on different planets often. So there's an enormous amount of work to do about that, and I think we can bring the best learning to play. In another 18 months, we really will have put a lot of people through various different programmes, a lot of enterprises through different programmes, and we will, I hope, be able to say, look, this is what works, this doesn't work, let's try and replicate the best, adapt as appropriate, and then we maybe will be able to live up to some of the hype. That I agree with you, that's, I think, where the focus is at the moment, on the enterprise development, and business models are critical.
I guess I would add on that, slightly in the same vein. I think it's really important that for investors, for funders, but also for organisations themselves, that you have some very clear metrics to measure what you're actually trying to achieve. And I like Christian's point earlier on about outcomes versus outputs. I mean, I'm having said that, I wouldn't advocate a vast amount of money directed to very, very sophisticated and energy-intensive measurement systems, but I think you have to have some clear metrics of what you're trying to achieve for that social impact and the financial support of that. I also think it's very important in this sector to be transparent about failures as well as successes. We hear an awful lot about successful models, and that's great because people need to understand what works. But it is a sector, social enterprise, the charitable sector is also very much like that, where we celebrate a lot of success, but we're not very transparent about what hasn't worked, and there's a lot of learning to be had from that, and I think that also helps keep a little bit of the balance and a little bit of the lid on what you said, the hype that can push things forward too much. And one very last point about the investment readiness. I think there's a huge problem with expectations, what people are hearing in terms of hype, that there's loads of investors out there, loads of things to put money into, and what the expectation of financial return is to go along with those social returns. And I think that's something that hasn't been busted effectively enough. The reality check around what investment ready is and what level of returns different people are prepared to accept.
Actually, building on that, I think what I found interesting over the last years, particularly with Sandbox, where we bring together young innovators around the globe, is that I think the term social entrepreneurship and the whole idea that you put social impact first, I think it came mostly also from the outside. When you go to a social entrepreneur in Kenya, what he will tell you is, well, until 2 weeks ago I didn't even know that I'm a social entrepreneur. That is something, because you do it intuitively. You say, and I think that is also a slight difference, I feel, between the BOP context and, let's say, the Western context, where in the BOP context, coming back to the enlightened self-interest, in the BOP context, it is your absolute self-interest to be not too self-interested. So you have to literally be embedded in the community. You have to literally give a very clear raison d'etre for why your company provides social value. And I think what we've seen over the last years is really that you have more and more people moving into this whole idea of impact in terms of going away a little bit from the social entrepreneur to the impact entrepreneur, really saying, well, we want to do both, right? It's this whole actually, I mean, that's something we try to relabel it into Generation Y question mark. So away from that age group to a mindset and saying that is a mindset where people wanted to put meaning to what they do. And in the end, and that comes back to the question, how can we build vehicles for that? So maybe we get away from that idea that you either have that it depends on your legal model what you actually do, or that it depends on what kind of the outside tries to put on you, but rather how can you build models that allow you to have financial and social on a similar level. And I think this whole tension is a discussion for itself, which we should have a whole event about, but the whole point being, how can we build organizations that bring to the individual level the tension between social and financial? Because as long as you have that in the hierarchy or in the organization, particularly in bigger organizations, accountability can always be outsourced, right? You somehow always outsource it then because my boss told me to do that we had to somehow, but then individually justifiable, it is not to you. So I think if we bring to the individual level accountability, particularly in a social sense, if we build the right infrastructure and systems for that, then I think it gets really exciting. I think we had an amazing debate the last days about social entrepreneurship. So how can we not only create social ventures outside, which usually don't, 99% don't scale, and we try to help that, but it's still not that many. But how can we take the really big organizations, and how can we then have social entrepreneurs who try from within to redefine what it means to create value? And I think that is the discussion which is coming up at the moment, particularly at Ashoka as well. Yeah. And I think there is a lot of things to be happening.
Could I maybe just add one thing to that, though, because just on the other side of the argument, the original question was about how do we prevent social enterprise from becoming just another fad. And I think there are two things need to happen, but I think social enterprise has gone very big danger right now, which is that it can just simply be seen as just merging into business and just becoming enterprise, full stop. And I think that is dangerous because, just to give you one example, there are a huge number of funds springing up right now that call themselves social impact funds, looking specifically to invest in Africa, for example. And what we're seeing is that because they're structured exactly the way any other venture capital or private equity fund is structured, when they look at Africa, and trying to find social investments. Surprise, surprise, the only ones that will justify the financial returns that they need are ones that would have gotten investment anyway. And so these funds are investing in telecoms, they're investing in a lot of very classic asset classes, and that's fantastic, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the danger of that is that the definition of social enterprise gets lost and only becomes those kinds of high return investable businesses. And we have to make sure that doesn't happen, because we need to have models like Grameen Bank, for instance, or Aravind, which I mentioned, or Oronab, which makes affordable cataract lenses, or Vision Spring, and many of these other enterprises that are doing great work, but that will never get venture capital funding because they don't offer those kinds of returns or exit potentials, or and so on. And so my fear is that in the rush to commercialize the sector, if you like, that those kinds of organizations will struggle, and we need to have alternative ways to support them or help them fund. And then the second way that social enterprise hopefully will not become just a fad, is if we can find more examples, which we desperately need, of successfully scaled enterprises like Grameen Bank at scale that can do that. And there are unfortunately far too few, but we need